Our guest for today's episode is Antonio Song. He is graduating from Carnegie Mellon University in Information Systems and Human-Computer Interaction. He has previously worked at Apple, Venmo, PayPal, LinkedIn, and is currently leading design at Iris Rover at Carnegie Mellon. I am Mayank Khandelwal, and you are listening to Whiteboard.fm. Hey Antonio, welcome to Whiteboard.fm.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Antonio, can you introduce yourself and tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a product designer. I'm currently a senior at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the US, and I'm actually graduating next week, so that's coming. I'm originally from Seoul, South Korea, and then I've been living in Beijing, China since 2007, and then went to middle school and high school in China. And then after graduating high school there, I moved to the US to attend my university here.
Great. So Antonio, how did you get started in design?
Yeah, I think I never really knew that I wanted to do design. So even my university degree is not design, it's information systems. I think I always knew that I wanted to work in the tech industry because that's what I was very passionate about. I loved iPods, Mac, Windows. I learned to how to hack your own computer. I was very interested in all those technical stuff. But then I think the design side came in when I was involved in various school activities like student council. I designed a website for the student council. I was in the yearbook club, so I did yearbook layout designs, and I was also in school's magazine team. So I did graphic design for fun, but also a pivotal point for me was I ran a little startup back in Beijing, and then when you create a tech and when you're trying to run startup and get users, you have to do branding yourself. You have to create your own logo for the startup. You have to create your website. You have to maintain social media presence. So I remember trying to do those little graphic design stuff by myself. And I think that's how I really started to get into design.
Nice. Also, Antonio, how did you, so from starting off in design to actually being a product designer, how did you get your first design job or internship?
Yeah, I think the first internship, well, there's two separate stories to this. The first formal internship in the US, I got it from a career fair at Carnegie Mellon. So every year they host two different career fairs for students, two main big ones. And I remember printing out 50 copies of resumes, just handing it to all the recruiters at the booths, trying to get any interviews. But I was actually pretty lucky because in high school, my high school had a partnership with Apple Chinese headquarters, where they selected few students interested in IT. And they brought them over to Apple's office and sort of exposed us to different types of Apple's businesses. And it just happened that year we were exposed to something called UX design. So a few international school students from Beijing came together in Apple China Beijing headquarters, and we were tasked with creating a interactive tutorial for Apple to be hosted on iTunes U store. And that was, I think that was my formal first design project that I did.
Nice. And what about your first freelance project?
Oh, freelance project? Well, it's not necessarily freelance. I didn't get paid for it or anything, but I think my first proper design project came when I went to CMU for summer school. as a high school student. So I think as a high school student, I was really interested in CMU because CMU was very famous for combining design and technology together. So
Right.
I wanted to experience what the school was like. So I went to CMU's summer program where a bunch of high school kids come and take two courses, college level courses. I took one programming course because I was into tech, but then I took a design course as well. It was called Communication Design Fundamentals. And in that course, it was the first time I was taught UX design formally by a professor. So it was about redesigning a parking meter. You know how like in street parking, you after you park your car, you go to a machine and then you pay for your parking. It was for redesigning that parking meter, and it was very interesting because I don't know if they didn't teach me the proper UX process because I was a high school student, but if I remember correctly, the course was more about following your intuition rather than sticking to the process too much. So eventually, me and my teammate, we sort of created our own process that made sense for us instead of doing all the popular UX research processes. So I think that was very important, and it was a project that taught me that it's good practice to not blindly follow all the UX processes, but to really understand what works for your project and go with those.
Right. So Antonio, what I've noticed is you've worked at really like big companies such as LinkedIn, Apple, PayPal. So how do you approach and apply to these companies in from creating your portfolio to
Hmm.
pitching or approaching them? What is your process?
Yeah. I think honestly, I think it differs whether you're a freshman or a sophomore or junior. I think the strategy is sort of different. I think freshman and sophomore year, my approach was more like I need to get some sort of portfolio made,
Right.
and I should try to sort of learn the process, the recruiting process as much as possible because I don't have that many experience with it. So I think freshman year, I made my first portfolio by looking at all the upperclassmen's portfolios. So I put something very, very scrappy in Squarespace, something that just looks like a portfolio. And then I would just go to a career fair, hand my resume to recruiters, show my portfolio, and then sort of learn the process, see what kind of questions they ask, see what they look for, see what kind of feedback they give me. So I think freshman was more of just trial and error. Sophomore year, though, I got more experience interviewing and things like that. So I think I tried to structure my portfolio projects much more carefully to make sure that the storytelling is there, discovering the problem space, conducting research, and then what insight did I get, and how did that insight inform my design decisions, and then making sure that my final design is sort of highlighted rather than muted by all the processes.
Right.
So I made sure I did that, but I think sophomore year I was still lacking a bit of interviewing skills, how to answer questions, how to show my inner thoughts and my logics. I was very lucky to get the PayPal internship at my sophomore year. Honestly, it was my last interview out of like 50 companies that I applied to. Fortunately, I got it, but I think sophomore year was focusing heavily on how to structure a good portfolio. And then junior year, I learned a lot from the internship. I learned how people conduct design critiques during meetings. I saw how people collaborate with PMs, how they persuade different stakeholders. So I think from junior year, really, I started to practice my interview skills, how to answer interviewers' questions, how do I show my design rationale in my speech. So I think, yeah, as my years went on,
Yeah.
I worked on different parts of the recruiting
Nice.
process.
Antonio, like you mentioned in your case studies, as you moved ahead with college and you got experiences from your internships, you got
Mhm.
a certain structure in forming your case studies, right? From showing your research to your visual design, to your design rationale, to your final design in the form of prototypes. In your case studies, you use a lot of prototypes. In every case study, you have your micro interactions at the end of it to emphasize on
Yeah.
the product and design aspect of it and not muting either of the domains. That is that is about your case studies. About the interviews, so in one of your Medium articles, you which
Mhm.
in about how to get started, how to get into UI UX in 2020, you mentioned
Mhm.
that portfolio and interviews are super important, and that when
Yep.
you were preparing for your interviews, you had a certain strategy. Can you explain more about how students can prepare for their interviews?
Yeah. I think definitely the top three things that I note in my Medium article is, knowing the UX design methodologies, and then having product thinking, and then also demonstrating your visual design skills. So I think something that's happening more recently is, UX design is getting a lot popular these days. So a lot of people from, different majors, even I'm from like a different major of information systems. A lot of different people are trying to come into the field. So naturally, the field is getting more saturated. And
Right.
as the field gets more saturated, the companies their bar is getting higher, much higher. So, like 10 years ago, if you knew UX design methodologies, and then if you could make some wireframes, you were a very good hire. Nowadays, I've noticed that you need to have those three areas nailed down if you want to get hired by the companies you want to go to. So UX design methodologies is the first thing. I try to show this in my case studies in my portfolio as well. It's basically demonstrating that I'm capable of conducting the common UX methodologies like user interviews, user research synthesis by using techniques like affinity diagramming, creating journey maps, things like that. So demonstrating that you know the processes, knowing double diamond, knowing how to sort of diverge to create lots of different options, and then converging to certain options after thinking about it or having critiques with your friends.
Right.
And then the next part is visual design. So after you've formed all your synthesis and done your research, it's as equally important to create a visually pleasing result. As, if visual design is lacking, then I think in the field of UX design, UX research is only like the first half of it. I think the latter half needs to be covered by visual design. So that comes through my high fidelity wireframes and the interactive prototypes that I make. So when I put those up, I try to make sure that all my wireframes are pixel perfect. I tend to use the rule of 4 pixels in my wireframes. So all the spacings and the sizings of the elements are in multiples of 4 to ensure that everything lines up perfectly. And then I make my prototypes with Principle. Principle software allows me to sort of control micro interactions on a very detailed level. And I try to make sure that all the animations are very nice, using nice curves and everything. And then the last part, product thinking, personally for me was a bit harder to grasp, but it's basically doing like a sanity check for your project. Who is this project beneficial to? Who's your target audience? You know, you could be creating an app that's already solving the problem that's been solved by many other companies already. So how do you validate your problem space? How do you know that it's an actual problem space that people are experiencing and has not been tackled yet? So I think those 3 areas are the ones that I try to catch.
Nice. And also, can you tell us more about your strategy regarding interviews?
Yeah. I think for me, interviews was one of the hardest parts mainly because English is my second language. I'm from Korea, so
Right.
honestly speaking, English conversations is one of my weaker parts of my designer toolkit. So what I really did was honestly, it was a lot of trial and error, but you know, based on tens, I think I had at least like 10 interviews per year. Um, Based on all these interviews, after I've done it for like a couple of years, I've noticed that a lot of interview questions tend to overlap, or let's say I started to understand what the interviewers were looking for in a candidate. So what I did was I made an Excel spreadsheet of full of interview questions that I've gotten back. So after each interview, I would open my Excel spreadsheet and then sort of list out the questions that I had trouble answering. And then I would sort of, in hindsight, think about why I had trouble answering those questions. Sometimes it would be that, you know, I really didn't think of that possibility when I worked on a project. So I would go back and sort of think again about why I did certain things. Sometimes it would just be something that I didn't really expect, so something out of the blue. So I would make a list of challenging questions, and then, oh, one thing that really helped me was using the STAR method. So the STAR method is basically a framework that helps you answer questions. I can't fully remember all the acronyms right now, but it's basically stating what the situation was, what my task was, and then explaining what my action was, and then what the result was. Oh, I remembered the acronym.
Those who don't remember can
okay.
those who don't remember can either Google for it or they can search for it in your Medium article.
Yes, but I think it's a very helpful framework. Once I started using that framework to construct sample answers, I was really able to explain my design rationale very clearly in a very concise manner. I think answering interview questions concisely is very important, and using STAR method really helped me.
So Antonio, can you tell us more about your #Reshare project at LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure. I'll quickly share my screen to show the portfolio. Yeah, so #Reshare is one of the main projects that I did at LinkedIn internship. Unfortunately, due to NDA, I cannot share too much detail about the project, but I can give a quick overview of the project and the internship as well. So my team was basically content experience team, which deals with a variety of consumer-facing features. Most notably, there's a feature called Teammates on the feed, hashtag posts, how the comments show on the app and the website, and also the redesign for the reactions. So those are all done within our team. And my main project was called #Reshare. Basically, it was a project that was born out of LinkedIn's new hashtag strategy, which started in 2019. In 2019, LinkedIn introduced a new hashtag header on the feed, which basically looks like this. I'm pretty sure a lot of the viewers of your podcast have seen this before. Hashtag posts are supposed to reveal or surface posts that are interesting to you. Those hashtags are things that users follow. It might be hashtag design, it could be hashtag hiring, etc. So it's supposed to cater to your personal interest. So these posts can be from completely random strangers. As long as the content is useful for the user, it would provide value for the user. So that was what hashtag was about. And they've basically changed the design from what was on the left, which is a very basic version of hashtag, to what's on the right, which is more visual version of hashtag. So that change took place in 2019. However, there was a little problem when the hashtag post was being surfaced with a reshare post. So reshare post is when a person A, reshares person B's post, and that becomes showed on your feed. So as you can imagine, the structure becomes a bit more complicated in that case. As you can see, you're seeing the same post because you follow certain hashtag, but now the difference is someone called Linda is resharing Tia's post. So all of this is relevant to the hashtag topic, but now there's two different people, two different actors included in the post. Now the problem was that because there are so many different actors and hashtags competing for attention, users really had trouble seeing, why are they seeing this post on the feed? Because the original actor's visual was so overwhelming in terms of visual design, a lot of users thought that this post was from an irrelevant person, so the engagement rate actually went down. So my entire project was revolving around trying to increase the engagement rate with hashtag reshare posts.
Right.
And actually there were a lot of fun parts about LinkedIn internship outside of work as well. San Francisco hosts a design week every year, and I got to meet a lot of cool people and a lot of talks. Famous people like Charles Nix, who designed the newest Helvetica font. John Maeda, of course, everyone knows John Maeda. He's very famous. And we also got a tour of a famous design agency called Frog. And, getting to take a picture with the CEO of your company, that was a very cool experience. And yeah.
That's great, Antonio. Also, Antonio, can you tell us about your Zoom project that you had done recently?
Yeah, that Zoom project was basically a really fun design exercise, really, that I did with my friend Sharon. And it was because, it's for a lot of us, it's our first time sort of working remotely or taking classes remotely. So in a very short amount of time, we had to use Zoom almost on a day-to-day basis. And it was just one of the things that we were noticing, which was the meetings we noticed that meetings were going over time a bit more often than before, mainly because, there is no physical constraints to sort of let you know that meeting is running over time. For example, if you're in a company and you booked a conference room, if your meeting's over time, then next batch of people are waiting out the door, and they would sort of tell you that you're going over time. Same with classroom setting. There's lectures, always lectures after lectures in a classroom. So there are those physical constraints that sort of work as a timekeeper, but we didn't have that in a virtual world of Zoom. So meetings tend to go over time a bit more. So friend and I decided, why not try and tackle this problem with a new feature. So I would love to share this project with your audience. We're calling it the Zoom Agenda. It's a convenient way to sort of add an agenda to existing Zoom system so that all the participants in the meeting can see sort of the entire agenda, and also around where they should be jumping onto the next topic. So yeah, let's take a look at how this works more closely. On the top, there is the agenda bar, which is dynamically changing based on whatever agenda the meeting organizer inputs. So the first step is, Zoom has an ability to let you create meeting and send calendar invites. And once you do that, it gets populated into the meetings tab on Zoom software. So we thought, okay, so a natural flow would be an organizer creates a meeting on Zoom and invites everyone, selects a time, and notifies everyone. Then the organizer has plenty of time until the actual meeting time to come up with an agenda to see, what are some of the things that we want to discuss in the meeting. So we thought that this meetings tab would be a very natural extension to the whole planning process. So it's very easy to create an agenda. You click add agenda button, which creates this whole timetable view, and you're able to enter the agenda name. Note that the time is already pre-selected based on the meeting time. So if you happen to change the meeting duration, then this will automatically get updated as well. Now, most likely you have multiple items on your agenda. We made it very easy to do that as well. You just do so by clicking on add to agenda button. That would create new slots so that you can enter more agenda items on top of your previous ones. And note that the time gets recalculated based on how many agendas you have. By default, they're added so that they're divided into most equal number of minutes as possible to start with. But you can also adjust that very easily by dragging the handle. One of the things that I really think is important when I'm doing these kind of UX projects is making sure that prototype is included in the writing. So the reason why prototype is really important is because I could show this kind of feature in a static wireframe, but if I do that, the small details can get lost and people might not understand how it actually works. But by adding a interactive prototype like this, really helps people understand, this is how you can adjust the time. This prototype was made using a software called ProtoPie. It was my first time using it, but it was actually really mind-blowing, actually. ProtoPie, unlike other prototyping softwares, let you store variables and use real data for prototyping. So this was why I was able to sort of animate the real-time numeric changes, which is very hard to do in previous softwares like Principle or Vision. Yeah, after you add the agenda, during the actual meeting time, the agenda bar sort of has a time ticker that ticks along with the time and lets you know which topic you should be on at the current given moment. And of course, a lot of people still tend to go over time. So we really thought hard about how do we let the participants know that the time is up. We didn't want to be too invasive. We initially had a version where there was like a red glowing bar to really make it clear that you're going over time. But from time to time, it might be important to go over time. Maybe they're discussing something really important in the last few minutes. So we didn't want to be too invasive. So we decided to go with a very gentle blue light up of the bars, which is similar to the previous visual design language. So while it's not intrusive, there's a message that says agenda is completed, so that the organizer and participants know that it's completed so that they can finish off what they were discussing. And yeah, the design project itself took around 1 week to complete, but it was like a very rapid one where we went from very quick ideation to very quick idea validation with our friends, and it was a very fun experience.
Nice. Can you share the design file and give us a walkthrough of that?
Yeah. So this is the original Figma file that we used for prototyping. As you can see, there are a lot of artboards.
Right.
The reason why there are a lot of artboards is because we did a lot of iterations. You can see iteration 1, 2, 3, etc. So something that I think is very important is, even if it's a very quick project, I still think following double diamond structure is very important. So diverging enough to see a lot of different options, to explore as many options as possible, and then eventually converging to a single solution. I still think double diamond structure is very important, diverging as much as possible to explore a lot of options and eventually converging into a single solution in the end. So this is precisely what we did there. Even if it was a short-term project, we made sure that we explored a lot of different options. So for example, I can show you how we explore different ways to create the agenda timetable. So there was a first version where when you click on Add Agenda, it creates a timeline, but it fills horizontally. So this was the first version that I came up with, and it made a lot of sense for me at that time because, time, when we think of a timeline, it flows in a horizontal direction. So this was the first version that I explored, and it seemed like, it's pretty intuitive and it's working. I see what's happening. I can see that I can resize it using the handle to see it pretty clear. But then when we did a very quick user testing with our friend, it quickly showed that this system breaks too easily. When you go over 3 slots, the text becomes truncated, the space becomes narrow, so it's very hard to see, or hard to see this working for, say, 6 different agenda items.
Right.
So we quickly noticed that there must be some way better to do this. And I noticed that there's a lot of white space when we go for the horizontal option. So that's why for the other iterations, we tried going vertically, and that made much more sense to us. So that's how we ended up with the actual version that we have. And even for the vertical version, we were trying a lot of different visual languages. For example, this is one of the earlier version of the visuals that we tried. Using bare minimum colors, minimum lines, gray, keeping it clean. But eventually, even having different visual explorations make a lot of difference because each of these things, whether it's a field or a button or like a drop down, makes a lot of difference. For example, this version where all the time indicators were underlined, it felt like we were making the user input the duration of each item. That sort of is counterintuitive to what we were originally envisioning, which was it would automatically calculate the time for us. So we decided to not go ahead with this idea, but instead, after a few iterations, we landed on our final version of the vertical timetable. And yeah, same goes for the actual meeting screen as well. We took a lot of care into taking screenshots of actual Zoom calls because we wanted to show and demonstrate that it works with the existing software. So, we asked a lot of people for permissions to use their video footage to be used in the prototype. But to begin with, we used our own video call to take a screenshot of it. You can see my little shark doll here, and then to quickly prototype what the feature might look like. So yeah, that was a pretty fun and quick double diamond project that we did.
That's great. Like, that's really great. Like, it's a great project, and yeah, to pull it off in a week's time while collaborating remotely, it's a big feat. So kudos to that.
Yeah, I had a really fun time doing it.
Antonio, you
Yes.
worked at other companies as well. You've worked at LinkedIn, Venmo, Apple, PayPal. What are the differences in their workings and their team structure? How their team works and what their working processes?
Yeah. I would say the easiest one to compare was PayPal and Venmo, mainly because it was an interesting internship. Venmo was acquired by PayPal very recently when I joined. So they were actually occupying the same building, just on a different floor in New York. But PayPal was a big company, whereas Venmo was a startup. So when I went back and forth to work on the projects, the way they did the projects were very different, I would say. At PayPal, things were more structured. I was given a single piece of project to work on, And I had my manager, and then I had a few teammates that I could sort of go for advice to. And then, I would share my design in the weekly design crit session. I would receive critiques, iterate upon that, and then, bring it back to critique, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas at Venmo, I was given one project, and then while I was working on it, I was given a second project. And while I was working on that, I got a third project. So things were moving very quickly. And also, there was a manager for Venmo, but, I wasn't really like confined to reporting to him. I could literally report to anyone because everyone would be working on everything. So they all had understandings of the projects.
Right.
So things are a little bit more fast moving. Also, like I mentioned how at PayPal, we do weekly critiques to sort of build up upon my previous work. At Venmo, those critiques worked a bit differently. I would produce some work. They would say, okay, this is great. We need to move on to the next piece. So I would work on the next part of the project, so on, so on. So it was the speed and the pace was very different. LinkedIn compared to PayPal was also a bit more different because LinkedIn had much bigger design organization than PayPal did, or at least for me, because PayPal was in the New York office where there were only 6 designers in the entire office. It was more like a design studio type of concept, whereas LinkedIn, I was in the middle of a big design organization. So at LinkedIn, something I did get that I didn't get from PayPal was access to product managers, engineering leads, data scientists, marketing managers, et cetera, et cetera. I had a lot more resources. Back at PayPal, we didn't have a design system to work off of. Maybe because it was earlier in 2016 and LinkedIn internship was in 2019. LinkedIn, things were a bit more structured. We had a whole design system that we could use and leverage. We had a Slack channel where we could ask questions to the design systems team. So if you're having trouble making certain elements work, then you could ask them questions. How do I make this work? Can I depash the symbol to sort of modify it for our use?
Right.
And then also something I didn't get at PayPal, but did get at LinkedIn was having meetings with the PMs and engineering managers on a regular basis. So I had to constantly align with the PMs and engineering managers to make sure that what I design and propose is scalable in terms of the code base, but also it's good enough that it's gonna have positive impact on our metrics that the PMs have set. So I think that was a new learning that I got from LinkedIn.
Nice. And how is all of this different from Apple?
Yeah. So Apple is also another anomaly here because I wasn't doing the program in the US. It was in the Beijing office. And also it was less of an internship, more of like a high school educational program.
Okay.
So at Apple, things were very guided.
Right.
They knew they were dealing with high schoolers. So they sort of gave us a very concrete project and they would sort of check on our progress on a weekly basis. And, we would do some work at the Apple office, but also we did work back at school campus during our IT classroom settings. So, I would say the setting was a bit too different for me to compare it directly.
It would have been a great experience at that age.
Yes, as a high schooler, it was a very good introduction to UX design.
Right.
For sure.
So Antonio, I seen from your portfolio that you're also going to be joining LinkedIn full-time as a product designer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us more about the hiring process at LinkedIn?
Yeah. So for me, it started with a information session at Carnegie Mellon. Every year, LinkedIn visits different universities for information sessions, but they only go to very few because of I think, time constraints. But LinkedIn visited Carnegie Mellon that year, so I went to their info session, and they do like a very useful presentation about the topics vary every year, but then that year they did, I think, some presentation about how to use design system or create one. So they do like a very meaningful presentation to help the design students sort of increase their skills or broaden their spectrum.
Right.
And then the designers and the recruiters stay after the info session for like 30 minutes or so, where you can go up to them and then showcase your portfolio. I also went and got feedback on my portfolio and my resume. And then from there, I got offered a on-campus interview. So not LinkedIn's campus, but at CMU's campus. So the next day, I was invited to a on-campus interview at our career center. So next day, I went to the interview session. It was a 30-minute portfolio review with a designer. So I had the chance to show one of my projects, and then the interviewer asked me, a few basic questions about how did you sort of approach the problem space? What kind of user research methodologies did you use? How did you sort of go from this sketches to this high fidelity wireframe? How did you decide which option works better?
Right.
Sort of broad questions about your projects. After that interview, I received a design challenge. So design challenge is basically LinkedIn giving you a design prompt, something related to their platform. My prompt, I think, was, I don't fully remember it, but it was about how to help college students better discover each other and become friends. So you work on the design challenge for a week. After you do that for a week, you submit it, and then if you make it to the next round, they offer you to fly you out to their Sunnyvale or San Francisco office for an on-site interview. The on-site interview was, I think, for me, the toughest part, because it's a whole day process. You go in by, I think, 10 a.m. and then you have a presentation, an hour-long presentation, where you have to show your design challenge and 2 other projects in your portfolio for 1 hour, including a Q&A session. After that, you have a lunchtime. And then after lunchtime, you have 3 back-to-back one-on-one interviews, which assess different parts of your skill sets as a designer. So it was a whole day project from like 10 a.m. to 3 or 4 p.m. I was absolutely exhausted, but gave it my best shot. And then, after that, I got the offer.
Awesome. Antonio, can you tell us more about the HCI project at Carnegie Mellon University?
Yeah. So I think CMU, like the reason why I aimed at coming to CMU in the first place was because of the HCI program here. I think, if you Google HCI, CMU is like one of the top results. They've been having this program for a very long time. I think it's very different whether you come in as an undergraduate, master's, or a PhD. But at least for me, I'm in the undergraduate program. The undergrad program sort of encompasses, it tries to promote interdisciplinary education. So if you come in as a CMU student, you can't declare HCI as your primary major. You can only declare it as your secondary major, which means everyone in the HCI program comes from different backgrounds. I'm from information systems, but a lot of people are coming from, design major, computer science major, cognitive psychology major. So everyone's having different backgrounds. And then also the courses that HCI program offer, the core courses are like UX methodologies, but then there's a lot of electives in different fields. You can do electives in like conversational UI. You can do electives in machine learning. You can do electives in, pure interface implementation, front-end development, iOS app development, etc. So they really try to give you a lot of options, even if you're in the same HCI program. But eventually, I think the program's goal is to, help foster students, regardless of whether they become an engineer or a designer, to foster design thinking so that whatever work they do in the future, they're able to use design thinking to come up with solutions in their respective fields.
Nice. Antonio, can you tell us more about your Cube Rover project that you're working on at Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, that's a very interesting project because Cube Rover, it's actually been renamed to Iris Rover in the past few weeks, but it's basically a lunar rover that's around this big. It's very small. It's only 2 kilograms in weight, and it's aiming to become the first private lunar rover to ever land on the moon. You might be wondering, like, wow, that's sort of out of the blue. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
It's because CMU's robotics program has been long running. It has a very long history. And one of the professors, Red Whitaker, he's one of the pioneers in the space robotics industry. So he's been, creating lunar rovers since like decades ago. And, some of you might know Google Lunar X Prize. It's basically a competition that Google came up with, basically calling all university students and saying, if you place an object on the moon, we'll give you millions of dollars as a prize. So a bunch of universities came together to create like a lunar rover and try to send it to the moon. No one succeeded, so there were no winners. And our Cube Rover team was part of that project as well. But even after the competition ended, our professor continued the research project to make sure that CMU becomes the first university to send a private rover on the moon. On the moon, there's been a bunch of government-led projects. All the rovers on the moon right now are developed by some sort of government, whether it's China or Russia or United States. But there are no rovers on the moon right now that has been built by a private company. So Cube Rover, or currently Iris Rover, is one of those projects that are trying to become the first private rover to land.
Great. Can you share your case study regarding your work at Cube Rover?
Yes. So it's still work in progress.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, you might be wondering, what does a designer have to do? What does a UX designer have to do with the lunar rover?
Right.
It's basically helping people or the operators control a rover remotely from Earth. So this is called teleoperation because we're operating a rover remotely. And it's basically an interface to control a rover from Earth. So, similar structure. I go in with project background, sort of describing what this project is about. And I think project background is especially important in this project because space robotics and UX design, it's kind of hard to make the connection at first glance. So I make sure that I explain the project background, saying, why, like, what is this rover and why is it sort of a thing? What is our objective? And then here's a picture of the rover to make sure people understand what I'm dealing with and what they should be expecting. And then I dive straight into the project scope. So what does a designer have to do with this lunar rover? So explaining that, I'm basically creating a software that helps people remotely control a rover from Earth. This includes a command line, a map, an image viewer, a telemetry data viz, and currently leading the design efforts for this interface. And here's a brief picture of the interface, again, to let the people know what they're dealing with. This is an interface project, not the physical rover project. Right. Of course, the team has a mechanical team that does the rover aspect, but I'm in charge of the software. So highlighting that. And then I go into the mission flow. This is basically a user flow, but in a space exploration setting. So it's basically noting what the software is being used for. It's basically being used for planning a route, making plans, identifying what route we want to take with the rover, creating plans for the moves that would take us to those routes, generating the commands that we would enter into the command line, confirming the safety of those commands, executing the commands, and then taking a picture with the camera that we have on board. So this process is a continuous loop once we land on the moon. And then we also have a communication diagram. This is sort of like a stakeholder map. So showing what kind of people are involved in the lunar mission, and what stakeholder are we actually designing for. And this diagram is very complicated to look at right now, but it's basically all the stakeholders that are involved during the mission. And then really from here, it's really starting the UX design part. So coming up with features. What do we include in the actual interface? What kind of features do we need to make sure that this mission is a success? So sort of describing how we came up with these features. And then here's a list of features.
Are these color coded? Okay, yeah, they're color coded.
Yes. So the blue ones are MVP features, the bare minimum features that we need to have. And then the green are nice to haves that if we do have them, it would be nice. It would help us with the mission, but it's not mission critical.
Right.
And then sort of similar deal with the LinkedIn case study. I show the different design explorations and iterations that I did. Here, I'm explicitly showing how the map interface has been evolving since the beginning. So if you look at it, it's very low fidelity when I started, and then you can sort of see structure being put in place as we evolved the interface. Now, then a lot of interviewers ask me, how do you user test this interface? So the answer to that is, it's really hard to find space experts to conduct user research with this project. Right. So what we do is we do mission simulations. So we make a virtual lunar surface on a game engine called Unreal Engine 3. And then we connect it to our interface that's developed with a real backend developer and a front-end developer. And then we try to run the mission, sort of gather all the team leads together and pretend that we're actually doing the mission. And then we would use the software, and that would sort of unravel a lot of different problems that we couldn't anticipate with the designers themselves. Here's also a picture of us doing paper prototyping, so printing a wireframe out and then sort of letting the operator show us what would they do if they wanted to plan a route around an obstacle, for example. So we use a variety of mixture of low fidelity testing methodologies and also high fidelity methodologies. Here's a little video of our virtual lunar mission. And then, this is a very complex project with a lot of different parts. We also created a design system. This is a little outdated, but this was the first version of the design system. And then really the design system was made because our interface got more complex as we moved further, and we hired more designers to work on the interface. And we noticed that more designers working on it means a lot of differences and variances happening all over the interface. So we needed a way to sort of amalgamate all these differences together so that the interface becomes cohesive.
Right.
So design system it became like a necessity when we hired more designers. And then I go into this is a better example of feature by feature explanation. Those ones don't have an interactive prototype because we're currently still working on this project. So the interface is still evolving and we're not at the interactive prototype stage yet. But I still use the same approach of splitting the project up by features. So this particular section is explaining how we add routes. This section is explaining how we edit the routes by dragging the dots. This section is introducing a concept called point of interest. So, when we travel along the moon's surface and we encounter like a boulder or something,
right,
how do we save that into a database? So this is explaining how we save it into a database and place it onto a map. And a circumnavigation feature. This is very interesting because when we see a boulder, first instinct might be, oh, we need to avoid that boulder. But what we actually want to do is get close to the boulder and inspect at a close range. So we want to take multiple pictures from different angles of the same border. So we have a neat feature that automatically plots equidistant photo zones around a point of interest. So that's called circumnavigation, which is a whole new feature on its own. So that occupies a section on its own. So yeah, that's the Cube Rover project in a nutshell.
Especially since it's a Luna project and also it's been funded by NASA.
Yeah, it's been funded by NASA up until a few months ago. Yes.
Nice. A couple of follow-up questions, Antonio. So since it's a very unique project, how do you do any form of analysis compare it with any other softwares? Because I'm not sure if there are any open source or available softwares for students. So how do you make sure that you're on the right track?
Oh, for the Cube Rover project?
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult with the Cube Rover project especially because we're trying to become the first private rover to land on the moon. So we're trying to set precedents. So there's not many resources that we can look for when we're looking for success criteria. So some of the things that we do is we read a lot of documents from NASA. NASA has a lot of old documents from a bunch of old missions where they talk very in depth about how teleoperations work. There's also a book written by a former NASA engineer called Seeing Like a Rover. It's basically a story about how they created an entire lunar rover, and then the whole process, the whole design process, the mechanical design, the software design aspect. So basically going into the shoes of the rover and seeing like a rover. In that book, there's a part where the engineers actually go into a box, like a paper box, and drill a hole in the box to see what it feels like to be a rover and to see it from a rover's perspective. So, we look at a lot of literatures. And then another important part is the virtual mission that I briefly touched upon.
Right.
Every virtual mission we do, we always run into some sort of issue. So even until today, we're still conducting virtual missions with our newest iteration of the interface. So I think the goal is before the launch in 2021, we have to conduct as many virtual missions as possible until we run into no problems during the virtual mission. Because only then we'll be able to minimize any margin of error when we are actually deployed on the lunar surface. But you're right in that it's very difficult to set sort of success metric for this project.
Right. Also, like you mentioned, you're in a space where you're not fully aware of the of the number of use cases that might be there.
Mm-hmm.
So the more number of virtual machines you do, the more virtual missions you do, the more number of use cases and edge cases you're discovering and trying to satisfy.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. It's a great project. All the best to you guys. And yeah,
Thank you.
So Antonio, I also had to ask that from looking at a portfolio, your projects are very diverse, like they're versatile in terms of the kind of domains they cover. Like the LinkedIn project covers hashtag reshare and it's more based on media. It's a media-based project. Your hashtag reshare project at LinkedIn covers a lot of social media and sharing, whereas your PayPal project is more on referral based. So that is more on based on a business metric, and the Iris Rover or a Cube Rover project is a Luna project. So do you choose your projects to be versatile, or is it by chance that you've had the opportunity to work on this diverse range?
Yeah, good question. I think, when I work on these projects, I think I've always been interested in consumer product space. So, just on a big high level picture, there's consumer app and then there's enterprise apps.
Right.
I think I was always interested in the consumer part, mainly because, how I got interested in design in the first place. I got interested in tech because of my first iPod Nano that I got back in 2007. When I used the iPod Nano, it was so easy to use, and I was an elementary school student, and I could figure out how to use it within a few minutes. So, when I had my first iPod, I was like, wow, this is so easy to use, so intuitive. Although I don't know what about this makes it so mesmerizing, I wanted to become the person who designed an iPod, and because that iPod was, such a consumer-focused consumer product, I think that sort of relates to my current designer's vision and archetype, that I try to look for projects that are consumer-focused, consumer-facing. So first internship I got here, which was PayPal, I sort of, during the interview, I mentioned that, I want to be on a consumer side as opposed to enterprise side, which was why they placed me in the New York office where they were working on, referral program and etc. And then for LinkedIn interview, they also sort of asked me, what are your interests? What kind of team do you want to be on? Because LinkedIn is such a big platform. And there, again, I mentioned I'm very interested in the consumer space area. So it'd be great if you could place me into a consumer area. So they placed me onto the feed team. Cube Rover or the Iris Rover is an anomaly because it's not a consumer product, but I thought the area, the lunar exploration area, was so fascinating. I was very curious about what role does a designer have in a space exploration project. So that curiosity sort of drove me to join that project. But as you mentioned, rest of the projects on my portfolio, like Carbon Cache or Focus Watch, they're all very consumer-centric projects.
Right. Also, a big factor that plays is the fact that you were explicit in terms of mentioning what space do you want to work in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah. In hindsight, my manager at LinkedIn told me the reason why I was placed in the feed team was because you are one of the few candidates who explicitly mentioned that you wanted to be on certain area. So based on that, I learned that, if you want something, you should definitely say it during the interview, it will actually work in favor for you.
Right. It speaks more of your confidence in what you want to do, and also the fact that you've researched enough to make the choice that this is a space you want to work in.
Right.
Right. Awesome. So, Antonio, what are your future plans in terms of like you mentioned, you've already worked on this range of products and design projects.
Mhm.
What domain or space are you interested in exploring more, and what are your future plans?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think moving forward, since I'm graduating next week.
Congrats, by the way, on that.
Thank you. Although it's like a virtual graduation due to COVID-19. But I think moving forward, I really want to sort of narrow, like sharply define what kind of designer I want to become. And then once I really define one, I really want to be an absolute expert in a field. So eventually, you know, if you name a field in the future, people will automatically think of my name first.
Right.
Right now, I'm still unsure what that field might be, whether it'll be social media or whether it'll be payments. But something that I'm really interested in right now is the intersection of social media and augmented reality, AR. I think that field is very fascinating. We still need few years, maybe 10 years or 15 years for AR to become mainstream. But I think because of that, I think the prospects are very exciting in that field. And I think I see high potential in that area. So I really want to learn more about the AR field, which is why I started to learn Unity starting last semester to learn how to design in 3D objects.
Right.
It's very difficult, but super rewarding if you're interested in it. And yeah, eventually I want to become an expert in the field so that, you know, people think of my name when they think of the field.
Can you share some more resources which are referring to right now for augmented reality?
Yeah, I'm definitely reading a lot of documentations on, you know, official Unity website, but also Facebook released a very cool tool a while ago called Spark AR Studios. Spark AR Studios is actually, I think, a lighter weight version of Unity. So Unity is super complex since it's like a game design software, but Spark AR, it's focusing on AR. So it has like face detection built in, and it has a lot of different ways to customize the AR features. You can even write your own scripts on it.
Nice.
It's very powerful. And if you look at their documentation on their website, you can sort of learn what are the capabilities, the current capabilities and limitations of AR is. So going off of those documentations helps a lot. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. Whenever I run into problems when I'm prototyping in AR, I just YouTube, you know, Unity, you know, how to make elements sort of show in front of all other elements. And then, you know, a lot of game designers actually post useful resources on this because UI design is also very important in game design as well. So, you know, a lot of relevant resources in game design community as well.
Right. Antonio, so throughout your design journey so far, if I had to ask you what are your top 3 learnings, what would they be?
Top 3 learnings. I would say, you know, going off of the Medium article that I wrote, really mastering your skills while, if you're in school, I would try to master the skills while you're in school. And if you're sort of moving in from a different field or an industry, I would make sure that you try to master the skills before sort of jumping into all these interviews and applications. Like I mentioned, the field is getting very competitive and it's expected to get even more competitive in the coming years.
Right.
So the industry is looking for a well-rounded designer in UX methodologies, product thinking, and visual design. So I would try to master these 3 different core skills, very balanced in a balanced way, and come up with projects that demonstrates these core skills. And then I would also focus a lot on storytelling for your projects. This is something I learned in my late junior year. Even if you have the greatest project in the world on your portfolio, if you don't tell your story properly, then you will not get the offer. It's mainly because the interviewer is a complete stranger, so they have to be on board with you and your decisions from start to end. So really practicing how to naturally tell your storyline so that anyone can understand your process is very important. And then finally, I would really practice hard how to show your logical thoughts to someone else. Normally, this is hard because you make your logical thoughts in your head and it makes sense to you, but the interviewer has not been in the process with you at all. So for me, it took a lot of practice to really show my logical thoughts to a third person. So practicing with your friends, even if you have an answer in your mind, practicing with your friends helps a lot. I practiced with a friend a lot back in 2019 as well. And my friends were able to tell me, oh, maybe you're jumping into conclusions here. I didn't really understand that part, or I'm having questions here. Or even something like, you seem very unfriendly. Can you like smile a bit more when you're answering questions? Like little things like this really helped me a lot in preparing for the interviews. So yeah, I would say mastering skills, practicing storytelling, and then really practicing how to show intentionality through logical thinking.
Right. That's great insights and learnings. Thanks, Antonio. This concludes our interview. It's been great knowing your story and your experiences. And I'm excited to know what more do you do in the following years to come.
No, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and I hope you liked it. If you watched the entire video, drop a comment below saying interview skills and portfolios are key to getting your dream job, to let us know. Subscribe to the Whiteboard.fm YouTube channel to check out other episodes and clips from this interview. This podcast is a part of the 10K Designers Network. You can check out other projects on 10kdesigners.com.